order. This is the open session for Brown Act training. This is the meeting of June 23rd, 2015 for the Board of Trustees. Madam Secretary, we need to call roll for this session as well? If you could please call roll.
Irma Archuleta. Here. Virginia Baxter.
Here.
Jeff Kellogg.
Here.
Doug Otto.
Here.
Sunny Zia.
Here.
And student trustee
Here.
Lomelli.
All right, very good. We have one item, and that is Brown Act training. So at this time also, this meeting for Brown Act training is a result of an action by the board months ago requesting this. This was in our last meeting. I announced that this would also be taking place prior to this meeting, our traditionally open session meeting. So as I think I've seen or someone notified me, it has nothing to do with other events except for this board months ago requested that we do Brown Act training, and therefore that's what we are doing today. With that, I will turn it over. Ruben, if you'd like to begin, introduce yourself, and we'll go from there.
Good afternoon, Mr.
Very
President,
good.
members of the Board of Trustees. I'm told that the mic volumes will be adjusted, so I'm going to just try and regulate myself. As President Kellogg just said, my name is Ruben Duran. I'm an attorney here in Los Angeles practicing public agency law for all types of public entities, school districts, cities. I'm actually the general counsel of a harbor district called the Oxnard Harbor District up in the Port of Hueneme. And I've been doing this for coming up on 18 years, almost exclusively for public agencies. I do training on the Brown Act and public policy compliance, ethics compliance, up and down the state for the Institute for Local Government and for the League of California Cities. And it's really one of my most enjoyable things to do, whether it's 20 minutes or 2 hours. The issues that we're going to talk about today are sort of fundamental to the core of what we do as public servants, what you do as elected officials, what your staff does as your appointed doers of deeds. So I'm very pleased to be here. I understand also President Kellogg just mentioned that this is as a result of the board actually taking the affirmative step, the active step, to request its own additional training. I know you all have probably been trained under AB 1234, where you get Brown Act and Public Records Act and conflicts of interest. So I think it's a very laudable thing that the board has decided to spend a little bit of extra time to talk about issues and questions that go to the heart of our service to the public. I understand your main goal is to educate young people on their way to whatever it is their goals are, correct? But you have to do that in the context of what the law requires as a public body. So I'm very pleased to be here. If I had any sound effects, the ominous dun 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 music would be coming up right now. I don't know if you have, so you have it all on your screens in front of you. Okay, that makes sense. The reason that lawyers like to put up little slides like this is sort of, quite frankly, to scare you. None of us, as public officials, as lawyers to public officials, want to be the subject of a headline where your ethics or your compliance with law is drawn into question. And so that's why you hire men and women like me to give you training. That's why you have your special counsel that you call to get answers to your questions. And so my goal here really is to give you some tools so that we won't see any headlines about the Long Beach Community College District and the Brown Act, unless they're really great headlines. Like today, hey, you know what? I don't know if the press is here, but to me it's a great headline that the board is taking a couple of hours to educate itself and its public about what the law requires for open meetings. So we start with the purpose of the Brown Act, and it's this whole idea of balancing the public's right to know what their government is doing with the government's need for confidentiality sometimes, because truth be told, there are things that you do, that we do, that sometimes aren't appropriate for public consumption, either at the moment when they're being discussed or even for some time thereafter. And that's because we're conducting business, right? Educating, 20-something thousand students, 30-something thousand students will raise issues of real estate, for example, sometimes. It will raise issues about how our employees perform their jobs and how we treat them as employees. It will raise issues, and I'm sure you all know this, about what? What's the big deal for closed sessions usually? Litigation, right? Someone wants to sue us because they've been harmed and they think the school district is responsible. So we absolutely have the need to be able to do our jobs in private sometimes. And so we'll talk about those different circumstances as we move through the slides here. And let me just say, if at any point any of you have a question and you feel the need to interrupt me with a question, please do so. I don't want this to be a 2-hour lecture. Even though you work with professors all the time, I'm not a trained professor. I'm a trained talker and a converser, and I really enjoy having conversations about these issues. It really is a passion for me. So please feel free to jump in with a question or a comment at any time.
Ruben, may I just ask the first question?
Certainly.
Are we going to get this presentation, or is it just the slideshow?
I only have the slideshow, but I'm happy
Okay.
to send you one if you want. We
Yeah,
try
that
to
would
be
be-
green at BB&K. A lot of times I print them out and they just stay as stacks. So I will absolutely send you one. Let me
Okay.
give you my business card so that you can remind me with an email if you don't mind.
Sure.
If you want to pass those out, that'd be great. I'd appreciate it.
And that was a question that we talked prior to this, and I said, let's not kill a couple trees because
Right.
it's do it all
Right.
electronic.
And,
So
and
he
also,
did-
if I could ask the clerk of the board to be sure that this is available to the public immediately after this meeting, print it out, and then post it on the website as well. Thanks. And we'll talk
It is.
about the requirements for that in the body of the meeting. Here is just a bullet point of what the key Brown Act provisions require and what their purposes are. We're going to talk about what a Brown Act body is. Raise your hand if you've heard that term before, Brown Act body. A lot of people think it's some sort of magical formulation. Sometimes it is, actually, depending on the question you're talking about. We're going to talk about what is a meeting under the Brown Act and what is not. We'll talk about the very specific notice and agenda requirements for a board like yours to be able to conduct its business. We're going to talk about the podium there and the rights of the public to come to the podium and address the board when you're conducting your business. I don't know where your closed session room is. I'm assuming it's behind me.
Behind it.
That's pretty standard. We'll talk about the appropriate instances to go back to that room, the laws that govern our conduct in that room, and then what governs our conduct when we come out. We'll talk about exceptions under the Brown Act, and then finally, penalties and remedies for violations of the Brown Act, because like any law, it has its own set of penalties that attach to when a mistake has been made. Sometimes even if the mistake is unintentional, there still could be penalties that attach. When is a meeting, and when is it not a meeting? Not sure why that picture's there, quite frankly. One of the sort of the sticking points that we deal with in modern society, quite frankly, is this notion of a serial meeting and what constitutes a serial meeting. This is a very brief, just quick precursor or preview of a deeper discussion we're going to get into later on today. But we're going to talk about how directly communicating with people can lead to a potential problem with a serial meeting situation. Communicating through intermediaries, how that might lead into a serial meeting or a problem. And everybody's favorite, communicating through technology, whether that be blogs, email, Facebook. Those things can present challenges and difficulty with complying with the Brown Act. And of course, we're talking here about, we're not talking about using blogs to raise questions or issues about, for example, what happened in Charleston last week. Very, very serious issue on the minds of a lot of people. That's not really an issue that the Long Beach Community College District necessarily has a role in dealing with. Now, it may trigger things here for you, but if you wanted to go on a blog and express your heartfelt condolences to those victims and their families, that's probably not going to trigger these Brown Act questions. But we'll talk about some instances where it might. Let me not forget that. These are our 4 bullet points that we like to tell all of our clients when you're sending emails among board members. Don't hit reply to all. How many times have you seen that in an email or heard it from somebody? I would say probably for the past 10 years, it's just something that we automatically say anytime we're dealing with elected bodies and email. If you're sending an email, if I'm sending an email to my Board of Harbor Commissioners and I need to send an email to all of them, I've got an admonition at the top and at the bottom. Board members, respectfully, please don't reply all to this email as it could create a Brown Act problem. I'm sure you've all seen it. So Who's subject to the Brown Act? That's an easy one. The five of you as an elected body, any subordinate bodies that you appoint. I'm not sure if you have them here at the college, quite frankly. Does anybody know? I'm sure you all know.
I believe the Academic Senate is an appointed body, would be the only other body subject to the Brown Act.
And so the Senate conducts its meetings according to the Brown Act and publishes notices
Yes.
and all of that. And the reason for that is because the law requires any body that the board creates must abide by the Brown Act.
So it has to be board created, we have a personnel commission, and that they're also part of this district, but is the caveat, or is it a
So the
function of board?
The trigger is if the board has created the body.
Well, we
Yes.
have a
Or if they're a
representative,
separate
right.
legislative body under a different set of rules.
They
So
are-
your personnel commission, I'm not sure about the structure of how that was set up.
It's independent of the college district board, so it was not created. It was created by law, and they follow their own rules and regulations.
Which sounds probably about right.
They also do follow the Brown Act in their
They
governance.
post a notice of their meetings. Now, I'm
Yes.
sure because they're the personnel commission, there are many things that they do that have to be done in closed session because they're dealing with personnel issues which have confidentiality protections under the law. So even under the Brown Act, those issues that they deal with would be protected.
And we have two committees, the audit committee of this board and a communications committee.
Okay, I'm surprised you have so few, quite frankly. Many boards
Yeah.
have many standing committees, and we'll talk about the committees as we go through the presentation. This notion of newly elected board members being subject to the Brown Act even before they're sworn in, is that a notion that makes sense to you? Have you heard of that rule before? When you first got elected, I'm hoping somebody told you that. That is essentially the law requires you to comport yourself with the Brown Act as soon as you know you're elected. The rule's not exactly clear in the statute. I know some lawyers who say, well, not until the person gets the certified election results are they considered elected. But I've typically take the more conservative view, and I say, as soon as it's clear to you that you are the elected or the board member elect, in other words, it's a wide margin between you and the next person who's behind you, you know that you are subject to the Brown Act and you should comport yourself to the Brown Act. Which means, what does it mean? No serial meetings, hey, President Kellogg, can I get together with you and board members Zia before I take my seat so that we can talk about what my priorities are? That's a no-no under the Brown Act, because guess what? That person is now stepping into the shoes of an elected official, and they need to act like an elected official even before they're sworn in. And of course, we talked about appointed bodies. Standing committees of a legislative body, we talked about that. Trustee Zia, just a little while ago, you said you have an audit committee, and whom else?
And communications.
Even if it's two
committee.
members, it's subject to the Brown Act. Some private organizations who receive their funding from public agencies or who were created by a public agency. In other words, sometimes, for example, I have a client that bought a railway company. And so because they created that LLC that created the railway company, there's a question about whether some things that they do must be subject to the Brown Act. And then there's a very specific rule about hospital operators that lease public hospital land. The Brown Act is not applicable to temporary committees. Another word that we use to describe those is ad hoc committees. It's a committee that was created specially for a specific purpose, and it's going to have just that purpose, and it's going to exist only for a finite amount of time. Okay? The rule that seems to have come down from the Attorney General in the cases that is I believe, 6 months to a year. If you're going to go beyond 6 months to a year of meeting as an ad hoc committee, you've essentially created a regular committee that needs to comport with the Brown Act. The Brown Act isn't applicable when you attend a town meeting here in town that's open to the public and is meant to discuss issues of public concern, or if you attend a meeting of another local legislative body. So, for example, the Long Beach City Council. If more than a majority of you wanted to go to Long Beach City Council and attend, you're welcome to do so. You're welcome to participate in that meeting. You are even welcome to talk about school district business at that meeting as long as that discussion takes place in the context of their meeting. In other words, they have an agendized item about the college district's stuff. You have a question?
Yeah, what about conferences? Do we, like, are we not supposed to, I mean, even pictures or, just gatherings? I've heard, it seems like it's not applicable, but I've heard that before, that, look, we're all here, we shouldn't really be seen together or taking pictures together or just even, break bread together.
And
Is that
I
correct?
do have clients who sort of take the very conservative position that, hey, you know what, we're at a conference all together, and let me make clear, it is completely acceptable under the Brown Act to attend a conference for, to go and educate yourself. I mean, it wouldn't make sense, quite frankly, if the law said, we expect you to follow all these rules, but you can't go educate yourself about the rules.
Right, but
Right.
can you discuss district business? I'm assuming no.
You may not, that's right,
Right.
that's a correct assumption. So you can discuss district business to the extent that it's part of the program in the conference. If it's, if it's a conference that's open to the public and the agenda says, a discussion of Long Beach Community College District issue X, and more than a majority of you is there, you can talk about it as part of the program. But 3 or more of you can't leave that conference and go to lunch and then talk about an item of district business, because then you're having a meeting among more than a majority outside of the view and the earshot of the public. So did I make it clear? It's a
Yeah.
little bit tricky sometimes, right? Because the exception is written such that if you attend a conference, you can discuss district business as part of the scheduled program. Okay, that's the language in the statute. And of course, attendance at purely ceremonial or social functions by more than a majority of you is allowed under the Brown Act. The law recognizes that we're human beings. We like to break bread sometimes. We know a lot of the same people. We run in the same crowds. It's okay for us all, or 3 of us, or 4 of us, to be at an event that's purely social or ceremonial. It's not okay for us to, at that event, have a discussion about an item of business that could come before your body. Okay? 4 types of meetings under the Brown Act: regular, special, an emergency meeting, which is pretty rare to happen, and an adjourned meeting. I have actually had an emergency meeting for some very dire emergency circumstances before. There are a lot of picky rules that you got to follow when you do that, and as a lawyer, I found it was kind of interesting and fun to go through that exercise. Not that we had to have an emergency meeting because there were public safety issues involved, but that we had to, look at the law and what it says, and hey, I didn't know we had to do this. You've all been to regular meetings. You go to them twice a month, I'm assuming. What we're in right now is a special meeting, right? Because it is not part of your regular meeting agenda. Have you ever had to have an emergency meeting? Thank God, no. And then adjourned meetings. Let me just ask, yes?
What would constitute an emergency meeting?
When an issue comes up that requires the board to act that implicates public safety, work stoppages, for example, a major earthquake perhaps, and you have to meet to decide how to deploy your resources, those types of situations. And then adjourned meeting is, anybody? You guys, have you been to an adjourned? This might be an adjourned meeting for all I know, quite frankly. An adjourned meeting is when you're sitting in a regular meeting and you haven't finished the business yet, and you say, well, you know what? We got to call it a night. I'm tired, or whatever the reason. So we're going to adjourn this meeting to a date and a time certain. That meeting then becomes an adjourned meeting, subject to all the rules of the Brown Act and some special rules for posting that we'll talk about later.
And I recently learned that there's an exception to Brown Act requirements even for a body like this during the course of labor negotiations. That a group can meet with
To
their,
give direction to its negotiator?
Yes, yeah, and that's exempt from Brown Act requirements. It's in the Ed Code, I believe.
That's actually, I think that's true. Yes, and I'm happy to confirm that with the Ed Code section if you'd like.
I've got it back at the office because we thought about that recently in the middle of some negotiations that we were in, whether that was.
And if you think about it, it makes sense, right?
Sure.
Because you have to be able to conduct your business in a way that's productive and efficient and effective. And labor negotiations are among some of the trickiest things that boards do, right? And there's a lot at stake sometimes. And we'll talk about the labor negotiation exception for closed sessions, but it doesn't surprise me that there's a special rule for that. excuse me while I make sure I catch up with my.
We didn't have it one, but
We'll talk very briefly about regular meetings. The Brown Act requires that each legislative body say when its regular meetings are going to be, first and third Mondays of the month at 6 o'clock, for example. And you have to set a time and a place, either by resolution or ordinance or some other bylaw or rule.
Sorry, Ruben, can I just ask you, with an adjourned meeting, is there a timeline? Because there was at one point, I believe last year, that we were getting close to midnight, and we were told that we'll have to go to agendize another meeting, or I could be getting this wrong, don't quote me on the specific verbiage, but because of the timeline, maybe our superintendent can opine, because I remember him coming over and saying to Jeff that, hey, we may need to consider having another meeting as we're getting close to midnight.
So interestingly, there are a lot of issues in the question you just asked. And I'm just going to sort of guess at what might have happened or what might have been happening. The basic question that I want to answer first is there's nothing in the Brown Act that says a meeting can't go past midnight or it can't start on one day and continue into another or several days. Nothing in the law about that. Okay, so if you're at a regular or special meeting that starts at 10 o'clock at night, who knows why, but if you are, or starts at 10 o'clock in the morning and goes to the next day, no violation there. No need to stop at midnight under the Brown Act. First, okay? Second is the Brown Act does empower legislative bodies to adopt their own rules and procedures for how they conduct their meetings. So if your body had a bylaw or a rule or a procedure that said our meetings will not go past midnight, that could have been at play. The third potential circumstance that I'm thinking about is if you had an agendized public hearing on your meeting agenda that was agendized for today's June 23rd, right? And you start at whatever time we're going to start, you're going to start at 6 o'clock on June 23rd, and you get to 11:59 and the public hearing hasn't yet been called. There's an argument, really very conservatively, that will say, well, our notice said that we were going to have the hearing on the 23rd. It's about to be the 24th, so we can't have the hearing. Now, I think that's a very conservative rule because what could happen is the board president could say, we are going to open the hearing now and continue it to the next day, or we're going to let the public know, those people who are here to participate in the hearing and to provide testimony, that we're going to get to their item. It just may not be at June 23rd. So those are the situations that I could think of that might lend themselves to whatever that situation was.
Well, do we have a policy that says we can't go past midnight? Okay.
There's no policy that says
Or
we
a
can't go
procedure,
past
yeah.
midnight. The issue at that point was whether or not we needed to have an adjourned meeting, and whether or not it made sense to continue, especially in light of the public had faded, and there's a question as to whether or not you are serving the purpose of the agenda items that are coming forth if the public is not awake anymore.
So it's not like a matter of law, it was just more procedural and
Right.
best practice.
And the third thing was that there were questions at that time about the board's agendizing and why risk any question of whether or not we were trying to do anything to keep the public away. So that was the conversation that was had at the time, not whether or not we legally had to adjourn the meeting.
And Superintendent Oakley, that's a very good point. Those are all sort of policy, not sort of, they are policy questions and considerations for the board and for the agency leadership as to, okay, look, what is our best way to serve the public? What is our best way to make sure that the public has the opportunity to see and hear everything that we're doing that they have a right to? And quite frankly, there's not really a right or wrong answer.
So
It
it's
really depends
construed
on-
broadly. It sounds
sorry?
like it's construed broadly so that, it's for the benefit of the public,
That's
whatever is in
exactly
the
right.
best interest. Okay. I
That's
gotcha.
exactly right.
It's not a
Yes.
matter of law.
Standing committees and advisory bodies are regular meetings and should have their own regular meeting schedule with their posted agendas. Ad hoc committees or not, don't require a posted agenda. I'm sure you're all familiar with this rule, 72 hours prior to the commencement of the meeting, the agenda must be posted. The agenda must be posted. Many bodies have an additional rule that they say not only the agenda must be posted, but all of the agenda items must be available to the public. The law only requires the posting of the agenda, which is an interesting sort of interplay sometimes. The better practice is always, I believe, to give the public as much lead time as possible so that they're aware of what it is you're going to be discussing, including the details. And so the agenda items should be posted with the agenda. We've always recommended, but the law doesn't require specifically that all of the agenda items must be posted. If you have a website, then it must go on the website. It used to be that you only posted on your public hearing board or your public notice board, and maybe a couple other places if you had the policy that said so. For example, you've got 2 campuses, so maybe you posted on both of those boards. And that posting location has to be available to the public for the full amount of time that the notice is required, so for the full 72 hours. And the way that sometimes arises is if somebody went and pulled it down, for example, without you knowing, somebody broke the glass and pulled it down, or somebody, or there was a security guard that you had to get to the posting area. Well, that's not easily accessible to the public, so that would be outside of what the Brown Act allows.
Hey, Ruben, can a district have 2 different kinds of agendas? So one abbreviated version, one full version. Is that acceptable?
It's not, so if I understand the question correctly, so you've got one agenda that's abbreviated that just is like a listing of what the items that are going to be
Yeah.
discussed. And when you say a full agenda, do you mean the
So
staff
all-
reports?
Right, all the items listed.
So if the full agenda is going to be made available to the board 72 hours ahead of time, it needs to be made available to the public.
Okay, what if it's less than 72 hours?
Then there's potentially problems with your public notice requirements.
Okay, so if there's information pertaining to an agenda item that's provided less than 72 hours, what's the best practice or your recommendation to make that available to the public?
The law actually requires that it be posted on the website as soon as you get it.
Okay.
So if someone, for example, you have an agenda item that's posted in 72 hours ahead of time, and someone wants to send you something for all of your consumption, a letter or a memo or some evidence or some pictures, when the majority of the board receives it, the law requires that it be made available to the public.
As soon as it's received by the majority of the board?
Yes.
Okay,
So
so if there's additional information requested about a board item and from one board member and staff provides it to the entire board, then at that moment it has to be publicized on the website.
If it's provided to a majority of the board, yes, it's part of the agenda packet. If you receive something here at the board meeting that gets distributed to the rest of the board, obviously it's too late to get it to the rest of the public, but you do have to make a copy available to the public here at the meeting to review. And then the next day, the clerk of the board has to make it available to the public on your website. Or at her office, not necessarily the website, I'm sorry, the rule doesn't say that, I apologize.
Can I get some clarification so that if there's a question here with regard to our board agenda, that we ask it and address it specifically? So, Trustee Zia, are you asking specifically about our agenda, the way it's posted?
Oh, my initial question was more broadly because I've heard people in different entities that I've worked with have 2 different versions of agendas, and I just wanted to get clarity if that's even acceptable. But the second question that I have is specifically for our district that, we have times, like for example, today, we have, questions on the board, on the budget that was clarification information. So that was provided yesterday. It was before today's meeting. So that should be, it sounds like it has to be made available to the public. Since we didn't make it available on the website yesterday, now we have to make it.
You should have a copy of it here at the meeting, but let me just say that you have to make sure that you're talking about a document that's not already protected under attorney-client privilege. In other words, it has to be a public record. So if you were to get confidential advice from your lawyer today, obviously the public's not entitled to see that.
No, it's like an expenditure of the itemization of the budget.
It should be made available at the meeting, just copies,
Okay.
because the 5 of you have it. And the idea again here is that you have a question? Yes.
It's 2 things. Back to the agenda, because I've been asked what Trustee Z is asking. We use board docs, and one agenda is called the simple agenda. The second tab is a detailed agenda.
Right.
Well, the simple agenda is what's posted, and according to the Brown Act, it's 20 words or less for the subject.
Right.
Doesn't have to give you all the background information on that item.
That's exactly what I started
So
out saying.
That's what I post,
Yeah.
because it's
Yeah, I
only.
wasn't aware of that.
So the
Which one
posting
is the
requirement
official?
is different than the available to the public requirement that I'm
That's-
talking about.
That was my, so which one is the, so if, I didn't realize we do post to, now that I know, which one is considered the official agenda? Is it the one on the website, or is it the one that we have on,
So the one on the board that's posted for the short agenda, right? The one on the actual physical board is the official agenda. And as the secretary just pointed out, the law requires that it have a brief description of each item to be discussed, 20 words, about 20 words or more, or less, excuse me. Okay, so that's the official agenda, but what she's talking about, which is what I started talking about, was the staff reports and the rest of the information that the board needs to be able to prepare for the meeting.